Marcus Blake stood at his post outside the Queen's chambers. The evening shift had just begun, and the palace was quiet as it always was at this hour. Through the transparent crystalline walls he could see the capital city stretching out below, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. It was beautiful. He had thought so every night for the past 3 years since he took this job. The palace was unlike anything on Earth. The Viridians had built it from some kind of crystal that could be made solid or transparent with a thought. Right now, most of it was clear, letting Marcus see the other guards at their posts throughout the massive structure. There were hundreds of them, all standing perfectly still, all connected to something he could never be part of. The neural network. That was what made the Viridians special. Every citizen had an implant in their brain that connected them to each other and to the Empire itself. They could share thoughts, feelings, and commands instantly. It made them efficient, coordinated, almost perfect in everything they did. Marcus, being human, had no such implant. He stood alone in his thoughts, as all humans did. He checked his weapon more out of habit than necessity. Nothing ever happened at the palace. The Viridian Empire was powerful and no one dared attack it. His job was mostly ceremonial, a gesture of goodwill between Earth and the Viridians. They had hired him because he was good at what he did, and because having a human in the royal guard showed they respected individual skill, not just collective ability. Marcus liked the Viridians. They were different from humans, but they treated him with respect. Commander Krell, his superior officer, had told him once that humans were fascinating because they could be loyal without being connected to anything. Krell had seemed puzzled by the concept, as if he could not quite understand how someone could choose to serve without a neural link, compelling them to do so. The first sign that something was wrong came at exactly 8 in the evening. Marcus noticed the guard across the hall, a Viridian named Torin, beginning to sway slightly. It was odd. Viridians never swayed. They stood with perfect balance, their neural implants constantly adjusting their posture without conscious thought. Marcus watched Torin more closely. The guard's eyes looked unfocused and his breathing had become irregular. Then Torin simply walked away from his post. He did not announce that he was leaving. He did not signal for a replacement. He just turned and walked down the corridor, his steps uneven and confused. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Viridian guards never abandoned their posts. Never. Marcus activated his communicator. He needed to report this to Commander Krell. But before he could speak, he heard strange sounds echoing through the palace. Voices, some shouting, some screaming, some just making incoherent noises. Through the transparent walls, he saw other guards leaving their positions, wandering aimlessly or collapsing where they stood. The lights in the city below began to flicker. First, a few buildings went dark, then more, then entire districts. It was spreading like a wave of darkness across the capital. Marcus had been a soldier long enough to recognize a crisis when he saw one. Something terrible was happening, and it was happening fast. He heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Commander Krell stumbling toward him. The commander's usually calm face was twisted in pain, his eyes wild and unfocused. Krell tried to speak, but the words came out in the Viridian language, harsh and guttural, not the smooth diplomatic speech he normally used with Marcus. Then Krell stopped, swayed for a moment, and walked past Marcus as if he were not even there. Marcus called out to him, but Krell did not respond. The commander simply continued down the corridor and disappeared around a corner. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what he was seeing. Every Viridian he could see through the transparent walls was either collapsed, wandering confused, or acting violently aggressive toward others. The palace's automated systems were failing, lights flickering on and off, doors opening and closing randomly. His communicator crackled to life. Fragmentary messages came through, voices speaking in panic, in pain, in languages he did not understand. He caught words here and there: plague, network, corruption, attack. Then the communicator went silent, dead air replacing the chaos. Marcus looked around the palace. He could not see a single guard still at their post. Through the walls he watched them abandoning their duties, some collapsing, some wandering, some fighting each other. The beautiful crystalline structure that had seemed so peaceful an hour ago now looked like a maze filled with confused and dangerous people. Every instinct told him to run. Whatever was happening, it was not his problem. He could try to reach the spaceport, get off this world before things got worse. He had seen disasters before during his time in Earth's military. He knew that sometimes the smart thing to do was to survive, to retreat and regroup. No one would blame him for leaving now, but he had taken an oath when he joined the Royal Guard. He had sworn to protect the Queen with his life. The Viridians had made it clear that this was not just ceremonial. They had trusted him with one of the most important duties in their empire, and unlike the Viridians, whose oaths were backed by neural programming and collective obligation, Marcus's oath was his own choice. He thought about what that meant. The Viridians served because they were connected to something larger, because the network made them feel incomplete without purpose. But Marcus served because he said he would, because he had given his word. Because walking away from a promise was not something he could do and still be who he was. Marcus made his decision. He activated his communicator one more time, not knowing if anyone was listening. His voice was steady as he spoke into the device. He said that he was Marcus Blake, Royal Guard, stationed outside the Queen's chambers. He said that he would not abandon his post. Whatever was happening, whoever was still listening, he wanted them to know that at least one guard remained at his duty. Then he sealed the entrance to the Queen's quarters, locked down every access point he could control, and prepared himself for whatever came next. The palace grew darker as more systems failed. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting strange shadows through the crystalline walls. Marcus could hear sounds in the distance, crashes and shouts, and the hum of failing machinery. He checked his weapon again, made sure he had extra ammunition, and positioned himself where he could see anyone approaching from either direction. The door to the Queen's chambers opened behind him. Marcus spun around, weapon ready, but he did not fire. Queen Lyria stood in the doorway and she looked terrified. She was young, having taken the throne only a year ago after her mother's death. She wore the simple robes she preferred in the evening, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. She spoke in English, her voice shaking. She asked him what was happening. Marcus lowered his weapon and told her the truth. He did not know exactly what was happening, but something had affected all the Viridians in the palace, possibly in the entire city. The guards had abandoned their posts. The systems were failing. They appeared to be alone. Queen Lyria stepped out of her chambers and Marcus noticed she was trembling. She told him that she had felt it happening. The network was dying. She could feel the connections breaking, one by one, mind by mind. Like lights going out across a vast landscape. Billions of her people all connected to her through the neural network, and she was feeling each one go silent. The pain in her voice was real and deep. She asked Marcus the question that seemed to confuse her most. She asked why he was still here. Everyone else had left their posts. The neural network that usually bound the guards to their duty was gone, corrupted, destroyed. Without it, the other guards had simply wandered away, unable to maintain their purpose without the network telling them what to do. So why was he still standing guard? Marcus thought about how to explain it. He told her that he had made a promise. When he joined the Royal Guard, he swore an oath to protect her. That oath was not backed by any neural implant or collective consciousness. It was just his word, his choice. And he had decided that his word meant something. It was that simple and that complicated. The Queen stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. In a way, he was. The concept of individual loyalty, of choosing duty without being compelled by biology or programming, was alien to her. She had grown up in a society where everyone was connected, where obligation came from being part of something larger. The idea that someone could stand alone and still choose to serve was almost incomprehensible. She told him what she knew. The palace sensors had detected something before the communications went down. A nanoplague spread through the air, designed to attack the neural implants that all Viridians carried. It rewrote the connection protocols, corrupted the network itself, turned what had been their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. It was an attack, deliberate and targeted. Someone had wanted to destroy the Viridian Empire, and they had found the perfect way to do it. Marcus processed this information quickly. If it was a nanoplague that targeted neural implants, then he was safe. Humans did not have such implants. He was immune not because of any special protection, but simply because he lacked what the plague was designed to attack. But the palace was a maze in the darkness. Marcus led Queen Lyria through corridors that twisted and turned, passing through rooms that had once been filled with courtiers and servants but now stood empty. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the crystalline walls, making it hard to tell what was real and what was reflection. Every few minutes they would see someone in the distance, a figure wandering aimlessly or collapsed on the floor. Marcus kept his weapon ready but did not fire unless absolutely necessary. These were not enemies. They were victims. The Queen walked beside him in silence. Marcus could see that she was struggling. Her people were dying, their minds destroyed by the plague, and she could feel each loss through whatever remained of her connection to the network. He wanted to offer comfort, but what could he say? He was a soldier, not a diplomat. He knew how to fight, how to survive, but he did not know how to ease the pain of watching a civilization collapse. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met. Marcus paused, trying to remember the palace layout. He needed to get them to a secure location, somewhere with supplies and communication equipment. The palace was enormous, built to house thousands, and he had only been working here for 3 years. He knew the main routes, the guard stations, and the Queen's quarters, but beyond that, much of the palace was unfamiliar territory. The Queen spoke quietly. She said she knew where they should go. The communication center was 3 levels down, in the more secure sections of the palace. If any systems were still working, they would be there. Marcus nodded and followed her lead. She moved with more confidence now, as if having a goal gave her strength. They descended a wide staircase, their footsteps echoing in the empty space. On the 2nd level, they encountered their first real danger. A group of corrupted guards stood in the corridor ahead, 5 of them moving in confused circles. Their weapons were drawn, and their eyes had the unfocused look that Marcus had seen on the others. One of them noticed Marcus and the Queen and made a sound that was not quite a word, more like a growl of recognition mixed with pain. Marcus immediately positioned himself between the guards and the Queen. He spoke in a calm, clear voice, trying to reach whatever rational thought might remain in them. He identified himself, reminded them of their duty, told them that the Queen needed protection. For a moment, nothing happened. The guards stood there, swaying slightly, their weapons pointed in various directions. Then one of them charged. Marcus had no choice. He fired once, a precise shot that dropped the guard without killing him. The others scattered, running in different directions, their corrupted minds unable to coordinate a response. Marcus grabbed the Queen's arm and pulled her through the corridor, moving quickly before more guards could arrive. He felt sick about shooting one of his fellow guards, even if it had been necessary. These were not enemies. They were sick, their minds destroyed by something beyond their control. They reached the communication center 10 minutes later. The door was sealed, but the Queen had access codes that still worked. The room inside was dark except for a few flickering screens. Most of the equipment was dead, the power systems failing throughout the palace. But one console in the corner showed signs of life, a faint glow indicating minimal functionality. Marcus went to work immediately. He had basic training in communications from his military days, enough to get the system working at a minimal level. He routed power from emergency batteries, bypassed damaged circuits, and finally managed to get a signal. What he found was not encouraging. The plague had spread across multiple worlds simultaneously. This was not an accident or a natural disaster. It was a coordinated attack, perfectly timed to hit the Viridian Empire at its strongest points. The capital world, the military headquarters, the major population centers all struck at once. The messages coming through were fragmentary, desperate calls for help that no one could answer. A Viridian military ship reported that its crew had been incapacitated within minutes of the plague's arrival. The ship was drifting in space, automated systems keeping it alive but no one capable of controlling it. A colony world sent a message saying that riots had broken out as the network failed, people turning on each other in confusion and pain. A research station went silent mid-transmission, the final words a scream of static. The Queen stood beside Marcus, listening to the reports. Her face was pale and tears ran down her cheeks. She had known the plague was bad, but hearing the scale of it, understanding that her entire empire was falling apart, was too much. She sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. Marcus let her grieve for a moment. He continued scanning the communications, looking for any sign of organized resistance or relief efforts. He found very little. A few human outposts were reporting in, their personnel unaffected by the plague but confused and asking for orders. Some alien species were offering help, though it was unclear if their offers were genuine or opportunistic. Most of the galaxy seemed to be watching and waiting to see what would happen to the Viridian Empire. After a few minutes, the Queen looked up. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady when she spoke. She asked Marcus why. Why would someone do this? What could they possibly gain from destroying an entire civilization? Marcus did not have a good answer. He said that people did terrible things for many reasons. Power, revenge, fear, ideology. Maybe the attackers feared the Viridian Empire's strength. Maybe they wanted the territory. Maybe they were simply evil. The Queen shook her head. She said that the neural network was what made them strong, but it was also what made them vulnerable. Every Viridian was connected, which meant that a plague designed to attack those connections could spread through the entire population like fire through dry grass. Other species did not have this weakness because they were not so closely bound together. Humans, she said, could never be destroyed this way because each human stood alone in their own mind. Marcus considered this. He told her that humans had their own weaknesses. They argued, disagreed, failed to coordinate, acted on individual desires that sometimes hurt the greater good. The Viridians had built an empire because they could work together perfectly. Humans struggled to cooperate even when survival depended on it. Neither way was perfect. Both had strengths and weaknesses. They sat in silence for a while, the communication console flickering beside them. Marcus knew they could not stay here. The communication center was not a defensible position, and the palace was becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. But he also knew the Queen needed this moment, needed to process what was happening before they continued. Finally, she spoke again. She asked him about his oath. She wanted to understand why he stayed. In Viridian society, duty came from connection. A guard protected the Queen because the network made them feel the importance of that duty, made them understand their role in the larger structure of society. But Marcus had no network. So where did his sense of duty come from? Marcus thought about how to explain it. He told her about his father, who had been a police officer on Earth. His father had taught him that a promise was sacred, that once you gave your word, you kept it no matter what. Marcus had joined the military young, served in a war that left scars he still carried. He had seen friends die because someone failed to keep their word, failed to be where they promised to be. After the war, he left the military, bitter and angry, but he could not leave behind the core of who he was. When he joined the Royal Guard, he took an oath. He swore to protect the Queen with his life. That oath was not forced on him. No one made him take it. He chose to speak those words, and in speaking them, he bound himself to them. Not because of biology or programming, but because that was what it meant to be Marcus Blake. To walk away now would be to betray not just the Queen, but himself. The Queen listened to this explanation with an expression of wonder. She said that she was beginning to understand something. The Viridians had always pitied humans for their isolation, for their inability to share thoughts and feelings directly. They had thought humans were weak because they stood alone. But maybe standing alone was not weakness. Maybe there was a kind of strength in it, a strength that came from choosing duty rather than being born to it. A loud crash interrupted their conversation. Somewhere nearby, something heavy had fallen or been knocked over. Marcus stood immediately, weapon ready. He told the Queen it was time to move. She nodded and stood, gathering herself. They left the communication center and continued deeper into the palace. As they walked, Marcus noticed something disturbing. The corrupted guards were not just wandering anymore. Some of them seemed to be moving with purpose, as if whatever remained of the network was trying to reassert control. He saw groups of guards moving in the same direction, heard voices calling out in the Viridian language. It was unclear if they were searching for something or simply following some damaged instinct. But either way, it made the palace more dangerous. They were passing through a large ceremonial hall when Marcus heard footsteps behind them. He turned to see Commander Krell standing at the entrance. The commander looked different now. His eyes had a strange intensity and his movements were jerky and uncoordinated. Marcus woke to the sound of voices. He had dozed off during his watch, exhausted from the night's events. His hand immediately went to his weapon as he listened carefully. The voices were speaking English, not Viridian. He heard at least 3 different speakers, and they sounded organized, not confused like the corrupted guards. He moved to the door quietly and listened. Someone was saying they needed to find a secure location. Another voice, a woman's, was talking about medical supplies. A third voice mentioned the Queen. Marcus made a decision. He opened the door slightly and called out, identifying himself as Royal Guard Marcus Blake. The voices stopped immediately. After a moment of tense silence, a woman appeared around the corner. She was middle-aged with dark skin and gray hair tied back in a practical bun. She wore diplomatic robes that were now dirty and torn. When she saw Marcus, relief flooded her face. She identified herself as Ambassador Zara Okonkwo, Earth's representative to the Viridian Empire. She asked if the Queen was with him and if she was safe. Marcus confirmed that the Queen was safe and called her to the door. When Queen Lyria appeared, the ambassador bowed respectfully. She said she had been trying to reach the royal quarters when the plague hit. She had managed to survive by barricading herself with a small group of others. They had been moving through the palace looking for more survivors and had heard Marcus moving around. The ambassador introduced her companions. The first was Dr. Chen Liu, a human woman in her 40s wearing a lab coat covered in stains. She was a xenobiologist who had been presenting research to the royal court when the disaster struck. The second was a young Viridian male named Talon, one of the few whose neural implant had not been completely destroyed. He could barely speak, his mind damaged but still functional enough to follow basic instructions. There were also 2 Viridian civilians, an elderly couple who had been visiting the palace as part of a cultural exchange program. Their implants were older models, less integrated with the main network, which had saved them from the worst of the corruption. They could not speak English, but they stayed close to Talon, who translated when he could. The group moved to a larger room nearby, what had once been a storage area for palace supplies. It had basic facilities and enough space for all of them. Dr. Liu immediately began examining the wounded, including Marcus's arm and several injuries the others had sustained. She worked efficiently, her hands steady despite the circumstances. While the doctor worked, Ambassador Okonkwo briefed them on what she knew. She had been in contact with other human outposts before the communications went down completely. The plague had hit multiple Viridian worlds simultaneously, suggesting a coordinated attack of enormous scale. The Viridian military was in chaos, unable to function without the neural network that had allowed perfect coordination between ships and personnel. More disturbing was the political situation. Several alien species were already positioning themselves to take advantage of the Viridian collapse. Some were offering humanitarian aid, but others were clearly preparing to claim territory. There were even rumors that some species were accusing humans of creating the plague, since humans were the only ones unaffected by it. Queen Lyria listened to all this with a grim expression. She asked Dr. Liu if there was any way to stop the plague or reverse its effects. The doctor shook her head slowly. She explained that the nanoplague was incredibly sophisticated. It specifically targeted the Viridian neural implants, rewriting their connection protocols and causing cascade failures throughout the network. Dr. Liu continued her explanation. She said the plague was not just destroying the network. It was also gathering data, transmitting information about how the network functioned to some unknown receiver. Whoever created this plague had not just wanted to destroy the Viridians. They had wanted to study them, to understand their technology completely. This suggested someone with significant scientific capability and specific interest in neural networks. Marcus asked if there was any way to trace where the plague came from. Dr. Liu said that would require accessing the main network nodes, the core infrastructure that connected all Viridians across the Empire. Those nodes were located deep beneath the palace in the Imperial archives. If they could get there and access the systems, they might be able to learn more about the plague and possibly find a way to stop it from spreading further. The Queen spoke up then. She said the Imperial archives were heavily protected, designed to survive almost any disaster. The network's core nodes were there, shielded and backed up. If any part of the network still functioned, it would be in the archives. But reaching them would be dangerous. The lower levels of the palace were older, more maze-like, and likely filled with corrupted guards. Ambassador Okonkwo argued that they should try to escape instead. She said that staying in the palace was suicide. They should try to reach the spaceport and get off the planet before it completely destabilized. Several ships should still be functional, crewed by non-Viridians or automated systems. They could escape to a human colony or neutral territory. The Queen disagreed firmly. She said that if they ran, the Viridian Empire would be lost forever. Billions of her people were already dead or damaged beyond repair. but some might be saved if they could understand the plague and find a way to stop it. She refused to abandon her people, even if it meant risking her own life. Her voice was steady, and Marcus could hear the determination in it. Marcus supported the Queen's decision. He said that running would solve nothing. If the Viridian Empire collapsed completely, the chaos would spread throughout the galaxy. Other species would fight over the territory, and millions more would die in the conflicts that followed. If there was even a chance they could stop the plague or preserve some of the network, they had to try. Dr. Liu agreed. She said that from a scientific perspective, understanding this plague was crucial. If someone could design a weapon this sophisticated, they could potentially do it again to other species. The galaxy needed to understand what had happened here, both to help the Viridians and to prevent future attacks. The ambassador looked at all of them and sighed. She said she had been outvoted, but if they were going to do this, they needed a plan. The Imperial archives were at least 10 levels below their current position. The route would take them through some of the oldest parts of the palace, areas that were not well mapped and likely dangerous. They would need to move carefully and be prepared for anything. Marcus took charge of the planning. He had military training in tactical movement and had studied the palace layout as much as possible during his time here. He outlined a route that would take them through less populated areas, avoiding the main corridors where corrupted guards were most likely to be found. They would move in a tight group, with him at the front and the ambassador at the rear, both armed and ready to protect the others. They spent an hour preparing. Dr. Liu gathered medical supplies and equipment she thought might be useful. The Queen changed into even more practical clothing, dark colors that would help them blend into the shadows. Talon, despite his damaged mind, insisted on coming with them. He said he could still sense fragments of the network and might be able to warn them if corrupted guards were nearby. The elderly Viridian couple decided to stay in the storage room. They were too old and frail to make the journey, and someone needed to stay behind in case other survivors appeared. Marcus showed them how to seal the door and left them with some supplies and a communicator in case they needed help. The group set out in the early morning hours. The palace was quieter now, as if the chaos of the first night had exhausted itself. They moved through corridors that grew progressively older and more worn. The crystalline walls gave way to stone, and the elegant architecture became more utilitarian. These were the foundation levels built when the palace was first established centuries ago. They encountered their first obstacle on the 5th level down. A section of the corridor had collapsed, debris blocking the way forward. Marcus searched for an alternate route and found a maintenance passage that ran parallel. It was narrow and dark, but it would get them around the collapse. They moved through single file, Marcus in the lead with a light, the others following closely. As they traveled, Dr. Liu explained more about what she had learned. She said the neural network was not entirely Viridian in origin. According to her research, the Viridians had discovered ancient technology millennia ago, left by a precursor species that once inhabited this region of space. They had built their entire civilization's network on this foundation, integrating the precursor technology with their own biology. The plague, she believed, was exploiting vulnerabilities in this precursor technology. Whoever created it had intimate knowledge not just of Viridian biology, but of the ancient systems that underpinned their network. This suggested that other species might also have access to precursor technology, integrated into their own civilizations in different ways. The implications were disturbing. They emerged from the maintenance passage onto the 7th level. Here they saw evidence of fighting. Bodies lay on the floor, both guards and civilians, some killed by weapons and others apparently dead from the neural damage caused by the plague. Marcus moved through. The corrupted guards came at them in waves. Marcus and Ambassador Okonkwo stood side by side in the doorway, firing controlled bursts that dropped the attackers one by one. The narrow entrance worked in their favor, preventing the guards from overwhelming them with numbers. But Marcus knew this advantage would not last forever. They had limited ammunition and the guards kept coming. Behind them, Dr. Liu was working frantically with her equipment. She had an idea, something about disrupting the local network signals that were directing the guards toward them. If she could create enough interference, the corrupted guards might lose their sense of purpose and wander away. It was a desperate plan, but it was all they had. Marcus's weapon clicked empty. He dropped the magazine and reached for another. his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He had 4 magazines left, maybe 5 minutes of continuous fire. Not enough. He glanced at the ambassador, who was down to her last magazine as well. They were running out of time. Then Dr. Liu shouted that she had something. Her device, cobbled together from palace systems and her own equipment, began emitting a high-pitched whine. The guards in the doorway suddenly stopped, their heads tilting as if listening to something. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly they began to back away. The whine grew louder and more guards retreated, their corrupted minds unable to process the conflicting signals. Within minutes, the corridor outside was empty. The guards had dispersed, wandering in different directions. Marcus cautiously moved to the doorway and looked out. The way was clear. He turned back to Dr. Liu and nodded his thanks. She smiled weakly, exhausted from the effort. Her device would not work for long, she said. It was draining power quickly and would fail within an hour. They needed to move now while they had the chance. The group gathered their supplies and continued their descent. The 8th level gave way to the 9th, and the architecture changed again. Here the walls were covered in ancient markings, symbols that predated the Viridian Empire. The queen explained that these were the oldest parts of the palace, built on the ruins of something even more ancient. The precursor civilization, the ones who had left the technology that the Viridians had built their network upon. They reached a massive door carved from a single piece of black stone. It was sealed, covered in more of those ancient symbols. The queen approached it and placed her hand on a panel beside the door. Her neural implant, damaged as it was, still had enough functionality to grant her access to secure areas. The door ground open slowly, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Marcus led the way down, his light cutting through the blackness. The stairs were steep and worn smooth by centuries of use. At the bottom, they found themselves in a vast chamber carved from the bedrock beneath the palace. This was the Imperial Archives, the heart of the Viridian neural network. The chamber was filled with strange technology, a mixture of Viridian design and something much older. Massive pillars of crystal rose from the floor, pulsing with faint light. Between them, consoles and displays showed flickering data, the last remnants of the dying network. The air hummed with energy, and Marcus could feel something in the atmosphere, a pressure that made his ears pop. Dr. Liu immediately went to work, examining the systems and trying to understand what she was seeing. The queen joined her, using her administrative access to unlock deeper levels of the network. Talon stood nearby, staring at the crystal pillars with an expression of wonder and pain. He could feel the network here stronger than anywhere else, and it was both beautiful and terrible to him. Ambassador Okonkwo helped Marcus secure the entrance. They moved furniture and equipment to create a barricade, knowing that more guards might find them eventually. The doctor's interference device had finally died, its power exhausted. They were on their own now, with no way to confuse or redirect any attackers. After an hour of work, Dr. Liu called everyone over. She had discovered something extraordinary. The neural network, as it turned out, was not just a communication system. It was a data storage system of immense complexity. Every thought, every memory, every experience of every Viridian for thousands of years was stored in these archives. The network was not just connecting people, it was preserving them. More importantly, she had found traces of the plague's transmission. She could see how it had spread, following the network's pathways, jumping from node to node across worlds. And she had found the source. The plague had been introduced simultaneously at multiple points across the Empire, but all the introduction points traced back to a single location. A research station on the edge of Viridian space, a facility that had been studying precursor technology. The queen asked if there was any way to stop the plague. Dr. Liu shook her head. The plague had already done its damage. Most of the network was corrupted beyond repair, but, she said, there might be a way to save what remained. If they could isolate the healthy portions of the network, cut them off from the infected sections, some Viridians might survive with their minds intact. The process would be dangerous. Someone with administrative access would need to connect directly to the network and manually shut down the infected nodes. It would be like performing surgery on a living being, cutting away diseased tissue while trying to preserve healthy tissue. And the person doing it would experience the full pain of the network's collapse, billions of minds dying in real time. The queen said she would do it, She was the only one with the access and authority to make such changes to the network. Dr. Liu warned her that it might kill her, that the neural trauma could be too much for any mind to handle. The Queen acknowledged this, but said she had no choice. Her people were dying, and if there was even a chance to save some of them, she had to try. Marcus wanted to argue, to find another way, but he knew there was none. This was why they had come here, why they had risked everything to reach these archives. He told the Queen he would protect her while she worked, that he would make sure nothing interrupted the procedure. She smiled at him then, a sad smile that held both gratitude and farewell. Dr. Liu prepared the connection. She set up monitoring equipment to track the Queen's vital signs and adjusted the interface to minimize the risk as much as possible. The Queen sat in a chair before one of the main consoles and placed her hands on the interface panels. She looked at Marcus one last time and nodded. Then she closed her eyes and connected. The effect was immediate. The Queen's body went rigid, her face contorting in pain. The crystal pillars throughout the chamber began to pulse faster, their light fluctuating wildly. On the displays, Marcus could see data flowing in torrents, the Queen's consciousness navigating through the network at impossible speed. Dr. Liu watched the monitors intently, calling out information. The Queen was accessing core protocols, identifying infected nodes, beginning the isolation process. It was working, but the strain on her was enormous. Her heart rate was dangerously high, her brain activity showing patterns that suggested extreme stress. Then the alarms started. Talon stumbled backward, his hands clutching his head. He said the network had sensed what the Queen was doing. The corrupted portions were fighting back, trying to stop her from isolating them, and they were sending every corrupted guard in the palace toward the archives. A massive force was converging on their location. Marcus heard the footsteps approaching, hundreds of them, echoing through the corridors above. He looked at the barricade he and the ambassador had built. It would not be enough, not against that many. He turned to Ambassador Okonkwo and told her to stay with the Queen and Dr. Liu. He would hold the entrance for as long as possible. The ambassador started to argue, but Marcus cut her off. He said this was his duty, what he had sworn to do. He was the royal guard, and his job was to protect the Queen no matter the cost. The ambassador looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. She understood. She moved to the Queen's side, weapon ready to defend her if anything got past Marcus. Marcus positioned himself at the top of the stairs, just inside the massive door. He had 3 magazines left for his weapon, not nearly enough for what was coming. But he had made a promise and he would keep it until his last breath. He checked his weapon one final time and waited. The first corrupted guards appeared at the entrance. Marcus fired, dropping them with precise shots. More came, and he fired again, his movements calm and efficient. He fell into the rhythm of combat, that strange state where time seemed to slow and everything became clear and simple. Aim, fire, reload. Aim, fire, reload. The guards kept coming, climbing over the bodies of the fallen, driven by whatever remained of the network's will. Marcus fell back down the stairs, using the narrow space to his advantage. They could only come at him 1 or 2 at a time, and he made each shot count. His first magazine ran out. He reloaded. His second magazine ran out. He reloaded again. He was wounded now, multiple hits from the guards' weapons. Pain burned through his left leg, his right shoulder, his side. He kept fighting, refusing to fall. Behind him, he could hear Dr. Liu shouting updates. The Queen was almost done. Just a few more minutes. Marcus had to give her those minutes. His last magazine clicked empty. Marcus dropped his weapon and drew a knife, the same knife he had carried since his military days. A guard. Marcus woke to white light and the smell of antiseptic. For a moment, he was confused, unsure where he was or how he had gotten there. Then memory returned in a rush. The palace, the corrupted guards, the desperate fight at the Imperial Archives. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his body, sharp and insistent. A hand pressed gently on his shoulder, pushing him back down. Dr. Liu's face appeared above him, her expression concerned but relieved. She told him to lie still. He had been badly wounded and had lost a lot of blood. She had been working on him for hours, and he was lucky to be alive. Most people would not have survived what he had been through. Marcus asked about the Queen. His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. Dr. Liu smiled and told him that the Queen was alive. She was unconscious, recovering from the neural trauma of the procedure, but her vital signs were stable. She had succeeded. The isolation protocol had worked. About 20% of the Viridian population had survived in the sections she had managed to protect. 20%. Marcus did the math in his head. Billions dead, but billions also saved. It was not a victory in any traditional sense, but it was survival. The Viridian Empire had not been completely destroyed. Some fragment of it remained, and that fragment could rebuild. Dr. Liu continued talking, filling him in on what had happened while he was unconscious. The corrupted guards had dispersed after the network was isolated. Without commands from the damaged network, they had simply wandered away or collapsed. The palace was still dangerous, but the immediate threat was gone. Ambassador Okonkwo had managed to establish contact with human outposts and several neutral species. Help was on the way. Marcus closed his eyes and let the information wash over him. They had survived. Against all odds, through chaos and violence and the collapse of an empire, they had survived. He felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Exhaustion. Grief for all those who had died. And something else. Something he could not quite name. Pride, maybe. Not in himself, but in what they had accomplished together. Days passed. Marcus healed slowly, his body recovering from the wounds that should have killed him. The palace's medical wing had been restored to minimal functionality, and Dr. Liu had everything she needed to treat both him and the Queen. Other survivors began appearing. Viridians from the protected sections of the network who had regained enough clarity to seek help. Human ships arrived first, bringing medical supplies and personnel. Then came ships from other species, some offering genuine assistance, others clearly positioning themselves for political advantage. Ambassador Okonkwo handled the diplomatic aspects, negotiating aid agreements and trying to establish some kind of order in the chaos. The Queen woke on the 5th day. Marcus was there when it happened, sitting in a chair beside her bed despite Dr. Liu's protests that he should still be resting. The Queen's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then clearing as she remembered where she was. She saw Marcus and smiled weakly. She asked him what had happened. Marcus told her everything, keeping his report simple and factual. He explained how the isolation protocol had worked, how the corrupted guards had dispersed, how help had arrived. He told her about the survivors, the 20% of her people who had been saved. She listened quietly, tears running down her face. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question that had been haunting her since she woke. She asked him why he had stayed, why he had not run when he had the chance, why he had fought for her people when he had no connection to them, no obligation beyond an oath that no one could have enforced. Marcus thought about his answer carefully. He told her that he had made a promise, and promises mattered to him. But it was more than that. He had seen her refuse to abandon her people, had watched her risk her life to save them. He had seen Dr. Liu work tirelessly to understand the plague. He had seen Ambassador Okonkwo coordinate relief efforts while exhausted and terrified. He had fought not just because of his oath, but because he believed in what they were trying to do. The Queen listened to this and nodded slowly. She said she understood now. She had spent her whole life connected to the network, feeling the thoughts and emotions of billions of her people. She had believed that connection was what made loyalty possible, that without it, beings could not truly care about each other or work together for a common purpose. But she had been wrong. Marcus and the others had shown her something different. They had shown her that loyalty did not require connection, that individuals could choose to stand together without being bound by biology or programming. There was a strength in that choice, a strength that came from free will rather than obligation. She told Marcus that the Viridians would rebuild their network, but they would do it differently. They would build in safeguards, protections against future attacks, and they would make the network less mandatory, allowing more individual autonomy. They had learned a terrible lesson about the danger of being too connected, too dependent on a single system. More days passed. The palace slowly came back to life as power was restored and systems repaired. Marcus continued to heal, growing stronger each day. He spent his time helping where he could, assisting the relief workers, talking with survivors, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Ambassador Okonkwo briefed him on the larger political situation. The investigation into the plague's origin was ongoing. The research station where the attack had been launched had been destroyed. all evidence carefully erased. But Dr. Liu's analysis suggested that multiple species might have been involved. A conspiracy to destroy the Viridian Empire before it became too powerful. The galaxy was watching closely to see what would happen next. Some species were offering support, helping the Viridians rebuild. Others were claiming territory that the Empire could no longer defend. Earth's government had pledged significant aid, both humanitarian and military, to help stabilize the region and prevent total collapse. More importantly, the ambassador told Marcus that his actions had changed how the galaxy viewed humanity. Before, humans had been seen as useful but limited, lacking the collective bonds that gave other species their strength. Now people were beginning to understand that there was a different kind of power in humanity, the power to stand alone, to make choices without being compelled, to remain loyal through personal will rather than biological imperative. Marcus listened to all this with mixed feelings. He had not done what he did for recognition or to change the galaxy's opinion of humanity. He had done it because it was right, because he had made a promise. But if his actions helped others understand humans better, if it led to greater respect between species, then perhaps some good had come from the tragedy. 3 weeks after the plague first struck, Marcus stood in the palace's main hall. The crystalline walls had been cleaned, the bodies removed, the damage repaired as much as possible. The queen was holding a ceremony, the first official gathering since the disaster. Survivors filled the hall, maybe 200 Viridians, humans, and members of other species who had come to help. The queen spoke in both Viridian and English, her voice carrying through the hall. She talked about the tragedy they had endured, the losses they had suffered. She honored those who had died and thanked those who had helped. Then she called Marcus forward. Marcus walked to the front of the hall, still limping slightly from his wounds. The queen looked at him with an expression of deep respect and gratitude. She said that Marcus Blake had stood guard when all others had fallen. He had kept his oath when duty could have released him.
He had protected her and her people when he had every reason to flee.
She was offering him the highest honor the Viridian Empire could bestow, the title of Defender of the Realm, a position that had not been granted to anyone outside the royal family in centuries. Marcus listened to the offer and understood the weight of it. It was not just a title. It was recognition, respect, and a place of honor in Viridian society for the rest of his life. He could accept it, stay on Viridian Prime, help rebuild the Empire, and serve the Queen as he had sworn to do. But he knew his answer. He thanked the Queen for the honor, said that he was grateful and humbled by her offer. But he declined. He told her that his work here was done. He had sworn to protect her, and he had fulfilled that oath. Now it was time for him to move on, to return to Earth or find new work somewhere else in the galaxy. The Queen accepted his decision with grace. She said she understood, that she had learned from him that duty was something you chose, not something others could impose on you. If his choice was to leave, then she would respect that choice. But she wanted him to know that he would always be welcome among the Viridians, that he had earned the respect and gratitude of her people forever. 2 days later, Marcus prepared to leave. He packed his few belongings, said goodbye to Dr. Liu and Ambassador Okonkwo, and made his way to the spaceport. A human transport was leaving for a colony world near Earth, and he had secured passage. It was time to go home, or at least to find what home meant now. The Queen came to see him off. They stood together at the spaceport watching ships come and go. She thanked him one final time, not just for saving her life, but for teaching her something valuable about loyalty and